All right, before this video starts, I just wanted to say if you guys have any questions you would like to ask me about Song of Ice and Fire or just random questions about me, leave them down in the comments. I will be doing a Q&A video that will be coming out next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Kind of just for a 500 subscriber special video. So yeah, if you guys wanted to participate in that, leave them down in the comments and I will answer them on screen on that video. And I hope you guys all enjoy the video. Before this video starts, I wanted to record this after I got done recording this video. If you guys want to see me do more chapters, please let me know. This is kind of a test video to see how if you guys like this, type of content, or you want me to kind of stick to more of the theories or prediction videos more than kind of the analysis of the stuff we already have. But yeah, I hope you guys all enjoy the video, and yeah, let's get into it.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, and welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Davos Chapter 4 and A Storm of Swords. Now, this is one of my favorite chapters, and I think it goes a long way of kind of getting deeper into the characters of Davos and Stannis as a whole, and this is kind of one of those chapters that really makes me love their dynamics. So I hope you guys like this video. We're just going to be kind of doing a breakdown and just going through the chapter. If you guys want to see me do more of these type of videos where I go through the chapters and stuff like that, let me know which ones you want me to do. I'm just kind of doing my favorites right now. I actually have the chapter right after this. Going to be doing that one as well. That's going to be the Brienne and Jaime chapter, where we kind of know what Jaime actually did within King's Landing with Mad King Aerys and all that stuff. It's one of the best, book scenes in the entire, thing. But before we get into the video, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment for more of this type of content, please do. And let's get into the video. So starting out this chapter, we see that Davos still being held in the prison cells below Dragonstone and all that. And he's been kind of put with Alliser Florent. Now, he was the hand of the king for Stannis beforehand. And long story short, in the chapter before, we learned that he had tried to sue for peace with the Lannisters. And that's a no-no for Stannis. So he gets put in this cell with Davos. And yeah, so the beginning of this chapter starts out with Davos and Alliser. They're sitting in the cell and they start to hear more footsteps than usual. Usually they only have 2 guardsmen that give them their meals and stuff like that. And in this chapter, we see Sir Axel Florent, and we also see 4 guardsmen. Now, this is odd, of course. And instantly, Alliser Florent thinks that someone's coming to either release him or let them talk to someone, or let him talk to somebody. And we find this is not the case. Stannis has actually summoned Davos. And as Davos and Axel Florent kind of ascend this staircase or whatever and start, crossing over to where Stannis is and all that, Axel kind of pulls them aside. And this is kind of where we see some of the playing of the Game of Thrones, but just in a very minor sense, right? Axel Florent kind of has this idea where Davos, if you kind of side with me and support me and kind of say I should be the hand of the king, well, I'll give you your own ship, I'll let you be a part of this, I'll help pardon you and all that stuff, because Axel Florent knows that Stannis trusts Davos probably more than anyone, because he knows he'll give him truthful counsel. And Davos sitting here is like, okay, I get what's being played here, and Davos is sitting here like, oh, it's not a bad offer, but it's just not Davos, right? It's not the type of person Davos is. And we know all this through Davos's, own thoughts and stuff like that. But the more interesting part is if he doesn't help, he's going to kill Davos. So really high stakes, a really great way to introduce kind of the tension going on within Stannis' camp at this point, and showing how desperate things are getting, as well as in this, we also hear that Axel Florent is seeing things in the flames, that Stannis is going to have this great, victory, and he's going to sit the Iron Throne and all that. But is this truthful? I don't think so. I think this is probably Melisandre mixing around the flames and Axel Florent wanting to see these things that really probably aren't there, right? But we're going to talk about this a little bit later on when we talk about Stannis seeing things in the flames, because I think there is something going on there. Now, the next scene that we see is Davos being brought into Stannis' presence and all of that, and Stannis and Davos start off this conversation with what is the punishment for treason. And as well as that, we take a note that Davos, sees that Stannis looks like he's aged quite horribly. He looks old. He looks just in really bad shape. Like the stress has gotten to him and stuff like that. And after, Stannis asks this question of what is treason, Davos starts to kind of put together, he does the, answer that is needed to be said, death, right? That's the answer Stannis is looking for, and nothing else is going to satisfy him on that. But what Davos understands is that this isn't for him. This is actually for Alistair Florent, who was the cellmate, as we talked about at the beginning of this video. Now, we then start to hear kind of how Stannis is like, this is a tradition that, traitors always get put to death, since the beginning of time with Aegon the First coming over to Westeros and all that. And something that I really think is interesting is he actually talks about Rhaenyra Targaryen. And I believe this is our first time we ever hear of Rhaenyra within the story. And you guys know I'm a really big fan of Rhaenyra. I'm a big fan of the Dance with Dragons if you've watched some of my other videos. And what I think is very interesting is that he says Rhaenyra Targaryen usurped her brother's crown, which is very interesting coming from a character that's very honor-bound and all that stuff. And I understand that in traditional Westeros, that is true, right? A brother becomes before a sister. But with this being said, Viserys had named Rhaenyra his heir. So this is an interesting thing where Stannis is kind of overlooking maybe this information, or he doesn't know that Viserys had always said Rhaenyra was the heir. We don't really know. This isn't something we know of or it's ever answered, but it's just an interesting little tidbit that I, kind of picked out when I was reading this part of the section. Now, with Davos starting to understand that he's actually sentencing Alistair to death, Davos tries to say that Alistair didn't mean treason, right? He meant a good cause and was trying to help Stannis. And this is one of my favorite parts of the entire chapter, and one of my favorite parts within all of the book series, is we kind of learn a little bit more about Stannis and his personal feelings towards Robert. We always had this inclination in other chapters of Stannis' feelings towards Robert, but this one we really see it, how Stannis feels very jealous of his brother, of getting, how Robert was able to inspire such loyalty and such love. And he starts to talk about how Robert, wins the 3 battles during Robert's Rebellion at Summerhall and all that. And even the lords that were against him became some of Robert's greatest allies and some of his greatest friends because he pardons them and all that. And this is a concept Stannis really doesn't understand, because both of these lords that he ends up catching, Lord Catherine and Lord Grandison, I hope I said that right, become 2 people that should have been gone to the dungeons. They should have been beheaded. They went against Robert, but Robert just pardons them, lets them go, and they become 2 of his biggest allies. They end up dying in the war for him. It's something Stannis just doesn't understand, right? He's not big into love and all that stuff and having compassion, right? And we see kind of that just Stannis wishes he was more like that, because he talks about how Robert, inspired all these things while all he inspires is treason in his eyes. Now, next thing we have after they get done talking about kind of the treason of Alistair Florent, is they talk about what I'm struggling with the name, sorry guys, Axel Florent's plan was. And Axel Florent's like, hey, we should attack Claw Isle, and, it'd be an easy kind of thing to take. They swore fealty to Joffrey and all that, and this would just be kind of a message, right? Kind of something like that Stannis is still here, the war's not done. And Davos, surprise, surprise, calls out Axel and goes, no, this is a terrible plan and you're a coward, basically. Which I think is really fitting of Davos's character, and I think this is really one of my favorite kind of lines from Davos, is kind of him just calling out Axel in front of Stannis and all that. And what he speaks here is just complete facts on why this is a stupid plan. The men of Claw Isle, which were people that were for Stannis in the war, and they had been from the very beginning, not just when, Renly came over to their side, or not Renly, but all of Renly's bannermen and the Stormlands came over. This was someone that had been with Stannis the entire time. And most of them were burned in, the hundreds of their men and stuff like that at Blackwater. And all they really would be doing is raiding women and children. So it makes so much sense to me why Davos is saying that it's cowardly and stuff, because it is. And then, stating that the Lord bent the knee to Joffrey, it's like, what is he supposed to do, right? Most of his men just died on the Blackwater. He's an older guy. He doesn't really want to keep fighting like this. It makes a lot of sense, and yes, some of the surviving men do go over to Joffrey, but it's just, in his situation, what would you do, right? And the men that do end up following Lord Adrian, which is the person that rules Claw Isle, Davos argues this idea that these men were following orders. They're very loyal to a fault. You can't blame this on them. They were following their lord. So I think Davos has a very compelling argument in this. And I think the biggest thing that hammers in the nail here that kind of wins Davos this little spar between him and Axel Florent is that Stannis kind of rebuts this idea that, these people were just following orders, were following their liege lord. And Stannis kind of says, it's their duty to stay loyal to their true king. And Davos kind of snaps back right then and there and goes, well, you pointed out, you betrayed Aerys. He was your rightful king. Robert Baratheon was not your rightful king. He was a rebel lord. He was, yes, your brother, but he was not the rightful king. And this kind of wins the argument for Davos as Stannis orders Axel to leave. The next part is something that I've planned on doing a theory kind of video on. I'm not fully made up my mind on this idea, but it's something that I think will be cited on that video, is that Stannis starts to kind of speak of the Iron Throne, of how it's not really that he wants this throne, but more that he is the rightful, heir, and that this is his duty, right? He had this duty to his brother and to the realm that, to get these bastards off the throne. And while he's talking about this, he's talking about the idea that the throne cuts the unwary and the people that are kind of deemed unworthy. He cites a lot of things like Aerys II cut himself and was called, King Scab behind his back and all that. And then Maegor was murdered on the throne. And then, there's always the rumors that the chair actually killed Maegor. So there's this idea that introduces kind of that the throne kind of hurts the people that shouldn't be on the throne. And this is something we kind of talked about a little earlier on in the books. Eddard speaks about this when he sits the Iron Throne for a little while. And it's something that comes up as a reoccurring theme, and we hear it over and over and over again. So something I definitely think is worth doing a video on, and I probably will. But let me know what you guys think on the throne actually kind of hurting, whether it's a, bad ruler or whatever. Now, the next thing we talk about that's major within this chapter is the idea of justice. After, he gets done talking about his duty to the throne and all that, and to Westeros in general, he talks about justice. And it's something that I think is a big ideal of Stannis and continues to show kind of his character motivations through a lot of the story. And he talks about how, Barristan had once told him that the rot in Aerys' kind of rule began when Varys came in and just started informing everybody and giving this paranoia to Aerys all the time, thinking that everybody was against him and stuff like that. And don't get me wrong, Varys definitely had his uses to the Mad King, especially in sniffing things out, like when Rhaegar was trying to get all these lords together to kind of make him the king and all that. And Stannis starts to talk about how that is not going to be the case when he reigns, right? When he does get to the throne, he's going to do justice. He's going to get rid of Cersei on the children, Varys, Jaime, and other people that he feels that the court really needs to get rid of. People like a Littlefinger, people like a Janos Slynt, who at this point was already gone, but that was somebody that, you would look at. People like Maester Pycelle. He's looking to basically just take out all these slimy people that have been lurking in the shadows and playing these games with the throne and stuff like that. And that's kind of what Stannis is talking about in this situation. Now, the next ideal is something that is, again, it's another thing where Stannis really feels like his brother kind of was a fool and just didn't really listen, because justice was something that was not done to the Lannisters, right? Stannis kind of talks about this idea of Jaime got to, go from this situation free, right? he had no punishments, really. He just continues on serving. And Stannis feels like this was done very poorly. Jaime should have been stripped of the cloak and sent to the wall and just not been here, right? Or executed at, just not where he had no punishment at all, right? And this is what Ned had wanted, Robert to do, but Robert listens to Jon, Aaron, like, and a lot of things as well, like in the marriage to Cersei and all that as well. From there on, Melisandre kind of comes back into the fray here. And we see this thing where Stannis kind of tries to reason with Davos of why he wanted to kill Melisandre. And Davos kind of explains that he believes that Melisandre kind of was this kind of demon type figure. And that Melisandre had sent the fire to kind of kill his sons and all these other things, as well as she kind of has been whispering in Stannis' ear and stuff like that. And Davos just does not trust her. Davos believes in the Seven. And yeah, so that is really the reasons Davos gives for why he wanted to kill Melisandre. And Stannis kind of goes that, you wronged her. She's always been, a good servant for me and all that stuff. And it kind of just ends there. Right, we don't see any more conversation between that and why Melisandre, was tempting to be killed and all of that. And it kind of turns towards Edric Storm. Now, if you don't know, this is the bastard of Robert Baratheon that had been at Storm's End with Renly, and Renly had kind of been raising him and stuff like that, along with the people at Storm's End. And Stannis kind of mentions that Melisandre has this idea of king's blood, makes power, right? Like they're trying, and Melisandre's really at this point trying to awaken the stone dragons, because as we'll see later on in the chapter, Melisandre kind of and Stannis start to believe that the real fight is not here, it's in the north with the others and the whole god of death type thing. And with that being said, Stannis turns this down. He says we're not going to feed Edric Storm to the fires. Shireen has really, had a bond with him. It's Stannis' own blood and all that stuff, and Davos backs us up as well. And this is one of the key things they got wrong in the show, where Stannis, we kind of see, he's kind of already on board with this. It's Davos that has to talk him out of it, right? In this situation, Stannis really is not on board with this. And we'll see in the, upcoming scene within this chapter that he has an alternative route. Within the same scene, though, Davos is kind of confirmed by Stannis that this plan is stupid, right? This plan is dumb of Sir Axel's, and it's very cowardice, and it's kind of just a thing that would bring more conflict, and it doesn't make any sense, right? Stannis kind of knew that he's not a stupid person. He's a very good military commander, and it's something we'll see throughout all of the books and his past with some of his past accomplishments as well. And this is where we get the big scene, the big two scenes, I believe, of this chapter that I think make it fantastic. We see Davos, who's gone through all of this stuff. He's a lower ranking lord, right? And Davos is ordered to kneel. And Stannis basically makes him Hand of the King, Admiral of the Narrow Sea. And Davos, understandably, someone that never thought he'd be in this position, kind of refuses and says he can't write, he can't read, he can't do all these things like highborn, lords can and stuff like that, and he's not really fit to do this. And Stannis kind of counters that all of his lords that he would have, considered for this position have abandoned him, and that, other candidates are just children, they're just not fit to be in this position, and that Davos gives him the best counsel, right? And Davos, Stannis also says he has a few good men left, but they are in other places, or they're just not right. And again, at the end of this, Stannis kind of goes, I don't trust any of them near as much as I do you, which is really a heartfelt kind of sentiment thing that we see. And Stannis usually doesn't give this kind of rewarding out, I guess, is what I would say, or this kind of compassion, which is something really different and it's really cool to see. And Davos becoming Hand of the King, I think, is a fantastic decision for Stannis. He is the best person for the job in Stannis' camp at this point. And Stannis kind of leaves this on a cliffhanger for kind of Davos to figure out, because Stannis goes, I'm going to need you, Davos, for the next battle. And Davos goes, the next battle, what we can't, have another fight against the Lannisters. We don't have the power to, the Lannisters with the Tyrells now. We just can't win another battle against the Lannisters. And Melisandre kind of finally enters the room. They've been talking about her for a while now at this point. And Melisandre enters and says, the final battle is not against the Lannisters, the Tyrells, the Starks, or anyone like that. It's against the great others. And Stannis starts to speak on this as well. And Stannis tells Davos that he's seen it in the flames. And Melisandre showed him kind of a hill in a forest surrounded by a ring of torches with men in black moving on top of it and shapes coming towards them in the cold. Now, this is something that I think is very interesting because up until this point, I believe Stannis had been using Melisandre's obvious power. He knows there's power with her, but I don't think at any point was he ever a real believer in the Red God, right? And at this point, it's very hard for me to believe that he is at least, buying into this whole situation because he is seeing things in the flames. And I do believe these were legit flames. I think this was a legit message. I don't think this is Melisandre setting up Stannis or anything like that. I do think he did see something. And Melisandre after this kind of says the battle has already begun, right? This is already kick-started. We're not ready for this really. And I really like this because this kind of refers to the battle at the Fist of the First Men, where we see Samwell's kind of reiteration of what happened there in one of his chapters, the beginning of the book. And I think this is really good because that is, again, one of my other favorites, chapters. And I love that Mel already kind of knows this, right? Nobody should know this at this point, but I really like to think that Melisandre is referencing the Fist, where she might have seen this in a vision or something like that. It is not actually confirmed in this chapter if that's what she was talking about or if she'd ever seen that in the visions, but I do think that is what she is referring to. And this is the point where we see the leeches. Now, something that is actually a lot different is that they had actually used leeches on Edric. Instead of Gendry, it's two different characters within the show. I do think the show did a good job by adding in Gendry. I just think it combined two plots that kind of just cheered up some things, but basically, Edric has this royal blood, and these leeches, basically, Melisandre says they will work, but they will also fail, which is really interesting, because I think what she's trying to say is, yes, they will accomplish what you want them to accomplish, but at the same time, they're not going to do what you think they are, right? Because he's going to toss in the names like we'll talk about here in a second, but it's not going to result in Stannis being king, which I think is something very interesting because I think that's how the story is going to work out in itself. I don't think Stannis will ever be the king, but I think what Mel is trying to say here is that even in the work she's doing, it's not really because of her. I think is what is also going to be was what she's trying to say. This is no work of hers. This is just going to be dumb luck. We're at war and stuff like that. And you look at the situations going on right now with Robb in a very bad situation. Balon is in a better situation, but again, it's the war. He could die at any second. Joffrey is the one that is the hardest to kill, but I like to think there's a lot of secondary messages being said within what she's saying right there. And she kind of pushes Stannis to, hey, you should give him to the fire. You should give Edric to the fire and let his royal blood awaken the stone dragons. And Stannis straight up refuses, saying again that Shireen is going very close to the boy and that he is of, Stannis' own blood and all that, and that this is just kind of wrong. And Melisandre lifts the lid on the platter or whatever for the leeches, and Stannis throws in each into a brazier one by one. And he says the names Joffrey, and then he says the name Balon, and then finally, which I think is really good here, this is a good foreshadowing, where it's very subtle, but it's kind of a pause, right? There's a pause. He kind of goes real quick with Joffrey and Balon, and then he gets to Robb Stark, and he kind of goes, usurper, Robb Stark. Drops it in, and that is the end of the chapter. And like I said, one of the just weirdest things is when you are first going through the books, I don't think most people see the red wedding coming. But when you reread it, you just feel like such an idiot that you didn't see it coming. There's so much foreshadowing to the red wedding happening, and it's being built upon for so long that when it does happen, it's just so good. That's what makes the red wedding so remarkable, is that it's not something out of nowhere, right? All the signs were there. It's just a lot of people like myself, you choose to overlook those things because you think, you know, yeah, George killed off Ned, but is he really going to kill off Robb too? But yeah, so thank you guys all for watching this video. If you guys want to see more videos like this was kind of just a test video. If you guys wanted to see the chapter kind of breakdowns and all that, and I hope you guys all enjoyed, and I will see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.